But there's always been diseases, right? There's always been things that have come along. We've always gotten through them.
Well, yeah. I mean, sometimes we got through it, like things like the Bronze Age collapse, 1177 BCE, right? We've had Bronze Age civilizations, ancient Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, the Hittite Empire, the Mycenaean civilization.
They all collapsed.
All collapsed, except for Egypt. Assyria almost collapses. It shrinks. Egypt survives because of one of my favorite people of history. I just got a book on him, Ramses III. He's a military genius, and he defeats the invading people, the Sea Peoples, in 2 great battles. And he's trying to hold up the whole Bronze Age world on his shoulders. But even Egypt, once he gets assassinated, and once he's gone, even Egypt goes into decline. So most of the more cities went out of existence. More trade is lost, more literacy is lost than at any other time in the Western world. Even the fall of the Western Roman Empire was not as great as the Bronze Age collapse.
Wow.
So things can really collapse now. And then there's several centuries, and you don't want to be alive in the centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. They're really, really bad time to be alive.
Oh, it gets pretty sketchy.
It gets really bad. But it opens up possibilities, and people start to experiment. They create new psychotechnologies, alphabetic literacy, numeracy, and that gives birth to the axial age, to people like Socrates and Buddha and Lao Tse.
Yeah, it's almost like you just needed it over time. It's like that's the cycle.
Yeah, there's some people who think that complex organizations go through what's called self-organizing criticality. They organize and they build and they get very complex, and then they get too top-heavy, like a pile of sand, and then it avalanches and it all collapses. But that provides a broader base, and then it can build again even higher than before.
Yeah.
And it oscillates in that way. Yeah, some people have argued that. Human cognition seems to work in that way too.
Yeah?
Yeah. And so you can't solve this problem, and you got a sense, but you can't. You're just framing it the wrong way, but you can't break out of the wrong frame. And what often has to happen is you have to break that frame. You have to and sometimes breaking is really, really, really hard. Sometimes it's easy. Like you'll do things like you'll say to people, what's the gray stuff that comes from fire? And they say smoke. And what am I doing with my hand right now? My arm? Oh, that's a stroke. And what am I doing right now? Oh, that's a choke. And what kind of tree grows from an acorn? That's an oak. And what do you call the white of an egg? And they'll say, oh, a yolk. Of course, it's not. It's the white of the egg, right? You fall into a frame and you get locked, right? And sometimes the frames are fairly easy. Sometimes the frames are really, really hard. Like you're deep in modal confusion, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so breaking that frame is like that avalanche. You have to break that frame. But if you don't break it to the point of trauma, if you break it in the right way, what it does is it allows the brain's capacity to self-organize, to reorganize from like a broader or different base.
Got it.
And then you get a new frame, and then you get that aha moment. And typically what happens, at least that's a significant theory, is the activity is predominantly in the left hemisphere, which is your logical sort of step-by-step, fine-grained, well-defined problem side. And you realize, oh, I can't solve this problem. And it goes into the right hemisphere, which was for like predation.
The party's at, yeah.
Well, it's predation. It's wide open attention. You're trying to get a wide picture, the big perspective. And what you do is you go over there, get a new, bigger perspective, and then bring it back in. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Do you think sometimes, like, say if you put, like, you took a bunch of sand, right, and just poured it into this this glass right here.
Right.
It would fill it up, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever think that there's a lot more going on in the world, but that us as a vessel only can understand so much?
Sure.
So that there could be so much more happening out here, but our ability to understand is it's this glass?
Right. So I would say I know that's the case because of what we rely on. So most of our problem solving is not done as individuals. You didn't invent English. I didn't invent English. You're not managing the electric grid. I'm not managing. You didn't invent these microphones. I didn't invent them, right? You didn't make these chairs. You didn't build this building. Blah, 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 blah. Like we forget that most of our no one person can run an airline or a railroad, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so what
you can show,
what we seem to do I've done work on this with Dan Chiappi. We've investigated the scientists moving the rovers around on Mars. But what our primary adaptivity is, we plug into that collective intelligence. And that collective intelligence can often grasp objects that we can't individually
I see.
grasp.
So it could be bigger than this.
Right. So, like, to give you a clear example, no one, and I'm not trying to get into political controversies right now, but like no one person can perceive or even measure or track global warming. It takes a whole bunch of scientists with a whole bunch of equipment all around the world.
Totally. You can't just be some dude guessing.
Right. And no one person, this is Ed Hutchins, roughly. No one person navigates a ship. It's a bunch of people and a bunch of equipment, and they navigate the ship, right?
Yeah.
And so we plug into, right, the intelligence of civilization, basically. But the problem is there are things that can even exceed that, because civilizations probably face what's called general systems collapse. What that means is, so here's a civilization, and it's growing, and what it's doing is it's solving problems, and every time a new problem emerges, it adds a new piece on itself, and it grows and it grows and it grows, and initially it's good at growing and it's solving more and more problems. The problem is, as it grows more and more and more, think about a bureaucracy or a government bureaucracy. As it grows more and more and more, it starts to become as complicated as anything it's trying to solve in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And eventually it gets so big that it can't manage itself well enough to solve any unexpected new problems. And then you get general systems collapse.
And it's making its own problems. And
it's making its own problems. And it starts to be, and you can tell when an institution is cusping on that, and I think the universities are suffering this problem, is when the bureaucracy starts to become for its own sake, rather than for solving problems, because it's much more about managing and maintaining its own existence, right? And the civil services of some countries go down that route too. So I think we have an individual limit, and then we deal with that by plugging into the civilization, but the civilizations also have a threshold.
Man, freaking existing, bro. It's complicated.